Welcome to my August 2025 essay. This month I'm thinking about perfectionism and the way it relates to injury and to philosophies of diagnosis. A quick content warning, I do have some flashback montages where I talk about injuries of my own in this essay. So as part of my master's, we had to read about the philosophy of injury and disease. This was especially fascinating to me since my experience of diagnosis or medical diagnosis as a coach is mainly when I'm approached by students who have received a diagnosis from a physical therapist or a doctor of some kind. I have a torn labrum. My hamstring is super tight. My pelvis is tilted or twisted. Students often have an attachment to these diagnoses. They inform the activities that students will or won't engage with and the risk assessments and activity assessments that students perform for themselves. But sometimes I wonder if students really understand what this diagnosis is. Do I really understand what these diagnoses are? Oftentimes, we'll just take the words that are given to us by an expert, like a doctor or a chiropractor, and then incorporate our own understanding of those words into our identity and into our daily lives. So let me just be clear at one thing as some table setting for this essay. I think that medicine is incredible, and I think that the expertise that trained doctors bring to the table is invaluable. I think the body of accumulated evidence that it has advanced our understanding of how to help people live better, more comfortable lives is amazing. I think that modern medicine is an achievement unparalleled in human history. I think that the anti-intellectualism that sometimes accompanies a skepticism about medicine is super dangerous. But I also think that a blind faith in the systems through which modern medicine is applied and understood is equally risky. We are just starting to understand the ways that medicine is a social practice, how people experience pain, injury, and diagnosis through the systems of healthcare has a huge effect on the impact of the treatment that they receive. So, what is the measure of a good diagnosis? Is it one that makes the patient feel better? We have to make a distinction at this point between a diagnosis that makes someone feel better and a treatment plan that makes someone feel better. Sometimes just having a diagnosis provides relief. It provides relief from the stress of not knowing what's wrong. So in this sense, a diagnosis has two purposes. It may relieve or exacerbate the distress that someone has, even without treatment having occurred. There's a really fascinating article that I linked to by a philosophy and bioethics professor, C.J. Blunt, that I found really thought-provoking on this topic of can diagnosis itself relieve or make worse the symptoms of something like pain or mental distress? So, is a good diagnosis then one that leads to an effective treatment plan? This line of reasoning seems a bit circular to me. Not totally, just a bit. If we're determining a treatment plan using a diagnosis and the treatment plan works, then the diagnosis was therefore also good. If the treatment doesn't work, does that mean that the diagnosis was bad or wrong? There is some really interesting research, and a huge body of research actually, on the placebo effect. The placebo effect can, for example, make people feel better. But we don't consider it to be an ethical form of practice because we don't understand what's going on in the placebo effect very well. It is also true that many effective treatments look very much the same, especially for the sorts of injuries and pains that we see in athletics. Oftentimes, in practice, the treatment that we'll prescribe, rest, ibuprofen, careful activity, precedes any sort of formal diagnosis. For a lot of the injuries and things that I see, there is no formal diagnosis. Someone comes in and they say, my pelvis is twisted. And we kind of move forward from there. I don't know where they received that information. I don't know if that information is true. I actually likely know that that information is not true, or that it's not true in a way that leads to harm. Sure, your pelvis might be twisted. It might be that there's an MRI that showed your pelvis being strange. But is that a problem? Most of the research we have today is like, no, your experiences of pain or loss of function are probably not related to like the way your bones are set up. So is a good diagnosis one that is accurate to the actual reality of the situation? Pain is a really good counterexample to this idea. It's currently pretty well accepted in the body of research on pain that pain is a biopsychosocial phenomena, meaning that someone might be experiencing pain even when biomedical evidence is absent. It may be that that evidence is there, but we can't detect it with modern technology. But there are moments, there's good research on people both experiencing pain without an observable reason and people failing to experience pain when there is a really good reason. There's also this really interesting, fascinating research on pain and circus identity in particular. This study conducted interviews with professional circus artists about how they experience pain and how it shapes their sense of self. This made me think about my own relationship to pain and doctors and medicine, and how this relationship has been built piece by piece through my own past experiences. Maybe because I am a recovering perfectionist, I noticed how diagnosis and treatment sometimes mirror the same traps that perfectionism can set for us. The idea that if you find the right label, the right diagnosis, the right exercise, then everything will be okay or you will become your optimal self. We're going to have a little flashback montage of Adam's past. Here I am. I'm a preteen in my karate class. I'm dressed in my karate uniform. It's a hot summer afternoon, and we are practicing roundhouse kicks in the back room. And suddenly I feel this weird twisting sensation in my supporting knee. My entire lower leg so suddenly feels super disconnected and gets stuck in a bent position. I cry out, I fall on my butt, I'm grimacing, everyone comes over, and I slowly straighten out my leg, using my hand to move my bottom leg. There is a loud clunk and this deep wave of relief. I am told that if it doesn't hurt anymore, it's fine. My knee feels wobbly, and I never really get an MRI or X-ray to check out the thing. Now I'm in my early 20s. I'm at circus school. I'm doing a drop to ankles on fabric. There is a sharp pull and a pop in my left hip, followed by an intense pain that fades really fast. I'm told to take the day off and see how it feels. It's a little sore the next day, but otherwise functioning fine. I'm 8 or 9 years old, and I make $800 by enrolling in an asthma study that my mom, who's a nurse, asks if I want to do. It's easy and it's fun, and I spend the money on something very cool. I am in my late teens training circus in San Francisco, and I end up at urgent care. It's my first time seeing a doctor who isn't my family physician. I know how to talk about my body. I know how to describe the problem I'm having. I know how to get a prescription for physical therapy. The physical therapy itself is boring and doesn't help the pain I'm experiencing. I learned to live in a state of chronic soreness and pain. I'm in my early 30s, and I've had a debilitating sciatica down my left leg for 2 years. Finally, a sports medicine doctor orders an X-ray and asks me to tell him about my pelvic fracture. What? Pelvic fracture? Oh, it would have been a hard fall on your butt. I recall several possible incidents. The doctor recommends an intraspinal steroid injection to relieve a pinched nerve. I am hesitant, but I go ahead and do it. And my pain goes from a 5 or an 8 every single day to a 0. And my entire life changes. End of flashback montage. I think we all have moments like these. Encounters with pain, injury, and treatment that shape how we relate to our bodies and how we relate to the medical system. These moments shape how we think about doctors, hospitals, and medicine in general. One big example that I've never personally experienced, but that lots of my students or co-coaches have experienced, is being on a medication for ADHD or depression or anxiety. For many people, especially kids, these diagnoses and prescriptions can become foundational to how we see ourselves. Sometimes that impact is positive, and sometimes it's not. But either way, the effect is usually pretty profound. When I'm coaching, I try to interrogate my relationship to some of these things. How am I shaping my students' understanding of their bodies and their lived experience? How do I relate to the various diagnoses that they bring into the room? When, if ever, is it appropriate for me to push back on what a student's doctor or physical therapist has told them? And what kinds of pushback, if any, are ethical in this case? How can I teach my students to self-advocate for themselves in medical situations? If a student is chronically injuring themselves, how much responsibility do I have in helping them evaluate their training habits? Does my answer to that question change for an adult versus a child? And here's the tricky part. We want so badly to get it right when it comes to health and safety. But just like perfectionism in our training, right is often a moving target. It is so tempting to jump in and agree or disagree with a diagnosis that a student brings into the room because it feels like the diagnosis should be objective. It feels like it should be easily mapped into a good or a bad diagnosis, into an accurate or inaccurate diagnosis. But it's just not that easy. From an academic standpoint, diagnostic categories are essentially consensus-driven guesses based on patterns that we've recorded from the past. But they're also shaped by culture, they're shaped by politics, they're shaped by access to research, especially when it comes to mental health. The DSM, for example, the Big Book of Mental Health Disorders, is rewritten every decade or so, and what qualifies as a disorder always seems arbitrary in retrospect, but perfectly reasonable at the time. The very idea of disorder is related to the cultural construction of having a perfect body or an optimal life. We can only recognize that we have a problem in relation to our cultural understanding of what our life or our body is supposed to be. Perfectionism sells us the idea that there's this finish line that we could reach if we just train hard enough, if we eat clean enough, if we self-improve enough. The idea that we can be pain-free forever or have perfect mental health or live a flawlessly balanced life is a cultural pressure unique to our day and age. Researchers who study things like happiness understand that happiness is relational and contextual. It has to do with our expectations about our lives. I started listening to this fascinating podcast, the Blind Boy podcast, and there's a lovely episode where he does a chat with a happiness researcher. So where does this leave us as movement coaches? While doctors may have broader medical training, our sport-specific expertise often gives us a sharper lens on what's going on with a student's body. At the same time, there are gaps in our knowledge that we don't know about. We don't know what we don't know. Both perspectives are incomplete in their own way. My takeaway from my reading is this. Diagnosis, treatment, and healthcare systems are our collective best attempt at applying thousands of years of human knowledge to individual injuries and struggles. But that knowledge is still limited. The systems are flawed. They're not perfect. And much like perfectionism in our training, chasing a perfect answer can sometimes keep us from focusing on the messy, iterative process of actually helping someone feel better. Part of helping them feel better might include helping them better understand diagnoses and unpacking our own relationship to those diagnoses. The last bit of this essay is just a big announcement that I have coming for my teacher training opportunities in the fall. That's going to be its own announcement and its own email, but there's a quick preview that I just wanted to put in here. Starting in September of 2025, once a month, I'll be doing one of my masterclasses as a live workshop, which you can get as the live workshop or as a recording or as a podcast like this one. Those workshops will come along with some monthly resources and teaching assignments, and I'll be focusing my attention on having conversations and ongoing learning in my Discord. I'll be phasing out my self-paced courses, and so if you enjoy my self-paced courses, you should go ahead and get all of them this month before I take them off the table. I'll still be presenting the material every year. I'll just be doing it in this new format. There's a little preview of the announcement, but you can watch on Instagram or on my email threads for more information about that as I start releasing it. Thanks so much.